A quiet retirement, they said. Almost, I said. But let me paint you a picture. A quiet suburban street, lined with cookie-cutter houses, each lawn manicured to within an inch of its life, where the only sound on a Sunday morning is the distant hum of a lawnmower and the occasional chirp of a sparrow. That's my street, or at least it was until Karen moved in. My name's Daniel, 62, retired judge, amateur gardener, and, until recently, a guy who thought he'd seen it all. Spoiler alert, I hadn't. Not by a long shot. The day Karen decided to cut down my power lines because my mailbox was too blue was the day I realized some people don't just push boundaries. They take a chainsaw to them. I'd been living in Oakwood Estates for a decade, a cozy little planned community where the HOA rules were stricter than a nun's ruler in a Catholic school. I didn't mind much. After 30 years on the bench, I knew how to play by the rules while quietly bending them to suit my needs. My backyard was my pride and joy. A sprawling garden with heirloom tomatoes, roses that could make a florist weep, and a small fountain that gurgled like it was auditioning for a meditation app. My house was modest, but the mailbox? Oh, that mailbox was a vibrant cerulean blue, a little act of rebellion against the HOA's beige dictatorship. Apparently, that was enough to awaken the beast next door. Karen moved in 6 months ago, dragging her husband, Gary, a man so spineless he could audition for a jellyfish role, and her yappy chihuahua, Princess, who barked like she was personally offended by oxygen. Karen was the kind of woman who walked like she owned the sidewalk, her bleach blonde bob bouncing with every step, clutching a clipboard like it was the Magna Carta. She declared herself HOA president within a week, citing her extensive experience managing a condo board in Florida. Nobody checked her credentials. Nobody dared. By month 2, she'd slap fines on half the neighborhood for infractions like unapproved bird feeder height and excessive porch gnome energy. I kid you not. She measured my neighbor's gnomes with a ruler. My trouble started with a letter slipped into my offending blue mailbox like a poisoned dart. The paper was crisp, the font Comic Sans, a war crime in itself, and the message was clear. Your mailbox violates HOA Regulation 3.1.2, specifying neutral exterior colors. Repaint or replace within 7 days or face a $500 fine. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. $500 for a mailbox? I'd seen murderers get lighter penalties. I tossed the letter in the recycling and went back to pruning my roses, figuring Karen would move on to terrorizing someone else's lawn flamingos. Big mistake. A week later, I found her on my doorstep, clipboard in hand, Princess yapping like a car alarm. Daniel, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that makes your teeth hurt. I noticed you haven't fixed that eyesore of a mailbox. I'm trying to keep this neighborhood classy, you know. I leaned on my rake, giving her my best courtroom stare, the one that made guilty defendants squirm. Karen, I said, it's a mailbox, not a neon sign. I like it blue. Let's move on. Her smile tightened, and I swear I heard her molars grind. You'll regret this, she hissed, then spun on her heels, her sensible loafers clicking like a countdown timer. The next morning, I woke to a new letter, this one threatening a lien on my property if I didn't comply. A lien. For a mailbox. I was starting to think Karen's clipboard was possessed by the spirit of a petty dictator. I decided to play nice. Well, nice-ish. I sent her an email, polite as a Sunday sermon, citing the HOA bylaws, which, fun fact, I'd memorized years ago. The color rule was vague, more of a suggestion than a mandate, and I pointed out that her own front door was a garish shade of coral that could wake a coma patient. Her response? A single line. This isn't over, Daniel. Oh, sweetheart. I thought, you have no idea who you're dealing with. By week 3, Karen had escalated to guerrilla tactics. I caught her sneaking into my yard at dawn, measuring my grass with a tape measure. She claimed it was 0.2 inches too tall. I invited her to measure my patience next, but she didn't take the bait. Instead, she started rallying the HOA board, 3 spineless neighbors who nodded along like bobbleheads. They issued me a formal warning, which I framed and hung in my garage for laughs. But then came the first real jab, a $1,000 fine for non-compliance with community aesthetic standards. I paid it, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to keep things civil while I plan my next move. Judges don't win by throwing punches, we win by setting traps. The tension was building, like the hum of a storm rolling in. I started noticing Karen's car circling my house at odd hours, her headlights slicing through my curtains like she was auditioning for a noir film. Neighbors whispered about her enforcement patrols, and one guy, Tom, swore she tried to fine him for leaving his garage door open for 10 minutes. I knew I had to act, but not yet. I spent my evenings sipping bourbon on my porch, watching her house, noting her habits. Karen thought she was the hunter, but I'd spent decades dismantling egos bigger than hers. She was about to learn that a retired judge doesn't just roll over. Then, one muggy Tuesday morning, I woke to silence. No hum of the AC, no whir of the fridge. My power was out. I checked the breaker. Fine. I called the utility company, expecting a routine outage. Nope. The tech's voice was grim. Sir, someone cut your power lines. Clean slice, right at the pole. My blood ran cold, then hot. I stepped outside, and there, across the street, was Karen, watering her petunias with a smile that could curdle milk. She waved, all innocence, but I saw the pruning shears on her porch. Game on, Karen. Game on. The air was thick with humidity that morning, the kind that makes your shirt cling to your back like a needy ex. My house was dark, the silence broken only by the distant yapping of Princess, Karen's chihuahua, who seemed to sense the chaos her owner had unleashed. I stood on my porch, staring at the severed power lines dangling from the pole like the world's worst party streamers. The utility tech, a wiry guy named Mike with a mustache that screamed 1980s cop show, confirmed my suspicions. The cut was deliberate, clean as a surgeon's scalpel. Someone knew what they were doing, he said, scratching his head. I didn't need a law degree to point the finger at Karen, but I wasn't about to storm her castle with accusations. Not yet. A judge knows evidence is king, and I was going to build a case tighter than Karen's perm. I thanked Mike and sent him off with a promise to call if I found anything suspicious. Then I got to work. First, I checked my security cameras, two discreet little devices I'd installed years ago after a rash of mailbox vandalism. Don't ask. The footage was grainy, but there she was, Karen, at 3 a.m., creeping across my lawn in a black tracksuit like she thought she was in mission. Impossible. She wielded those pruning shears with the confidence of a serial plant killer, snipping my power lines with a flourish before scurrying back to her lair. I saved the footage to 3 different drives, because if I'd learned anything in my 30 years on the bench, it's that evidence has a way of disappearing when you need it most. I called the utility company back to schedule repairs, but they warned me it'd take 48 hours. Apparently, Karen's little stunt had fried some transformer down the line. My fridge was already sweating, and my tomatoes were wilting in the greenhouse without the fans. I could have marched over to Karen's and read her the riot act, but that's what she wanted, a reaction, a scene, something she could twist into Daniel's Unhinged for her HOA cronies. Instead, I poured myself a glass of iced tea, now warm, thanks to her, and sat down to strategize. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one, but on my terms. My first move was to rally allies. I strolled over to Tom's house, the guy who'd been fined for his garage door. Tom was a burly mechanic with a laugh like a foghorn and a backyard full of vintage car parts that Karen had dubbed an aesthetic atrocity. He was hosing down his driveway when I approached, his face lighting up when I mentioned Karen's name. That woman's a menace, he growled, spraying water with enough force to strip paint. She tried to fine me for unauthorized tire storage. They're car parts, not garbage. I showed him the security footage on my phone, and his eyes widened. Holy hell, she cut your power? That's a felony, right? I nodded, keeping my cards close. Let's just say she's digging her own grave. You in for a little neighborhood justice? Tom was all in, and he tipped me off about another ally. Maria, a retired librarian who lived 2 houses down. Maria was the kind of woman who could silence a room with a single arched eyebrow, And she'd been on Karen's bad side ever since her cat wandered into Karen's yard and got a trespassing warning. I found Maria pruning her azaleas, her hands steady despite her 70 years. When I showed her the footage, she snorted. That tracksuit makes her look like a discount ninja. What's the plan, Daniel? I grinned. For now, we gather intel. Karen's got the HOA board in her pocket, but pockets can be emptied. We formed an unofficial resistance. Me, Tom, and Maria, the neighborhood's answer to the Avengers, if the Avengers were armed with gardening tools and a grudge. Our first task was to dig into Karen's reign of terror. Maria, with her librarian superpowers, pulled HOA records from the community website, public domain, thank you very much, and found a gold mine. Karen had been issuing fines left and right, but the funds were murky. The HOA's bank account was supposed to be transparent, but the last audit was delayed under her watch. Suspicious? Oh, just a tad. I filed that away for later, like a squirrel hoarding nuts for winter. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. By noon, she'd slapped a new violation notice on my door, this time for excessive vegetation in my backyard. Apparently, my tomatoes were overly lush and disrupting the community's visual harmony. I had to hand it to her. She had a knack for making the absurd sound official. I taped the notice to my fridge, which was now more of a warm pantry, and decided to up the ante. I called a lawyer friend, Susan, who specialized in property disputes. Susan laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone when I told her about the power lines. Daniel, this is criminal, she said. File a police report, get a restraining order, and sue her for damages. I'll draft the paperwork. I told her to hold off, just for now. I wanted Karen to think she was winning. That evening, as the sun dipped low and my house sweltered like a sauna, I noticed Karen's car pulling into her driveway. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, and started inspecting my front yard, jotting notes with the glee of a kid defacing a library book. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside. Evening, Karen, I called, keeping my tone light. Find any more crimes in my petunias? She froze, her pen hovering like a guillotine. Just doing my job, Daniel, she said, her smile as fake as her community spirit. I held up my phone, making sure she saw the red recording dot. Good to know. By the way, the utility company's asking questions about my power lines. Got any theories? Her face twitched, just for a second, before she scurried back to her house. Point, Daniel. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, I woke to find my front lawn littered with HOA violation notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. Unapproved mailbox height, inappropriate fence opacity, even suspiciously vibrant grass. It was like she'd spent all night dreaming up new ways to torment me. I gathered the papers, chuckling at her desperation, and called Tom and Maria for an emergency meeting. We met in Maria's kitchen, over coffee and her famous lemon bars, which were the only thing keeping me sane in my unpowered hell. She's unhinged, Tom said, crumpling a notice. Maria nodded, her eyes glinting. She's sloppy too. That's her weakness. I leaned back, the taste of lemon sharp on my tongue. Then let's make her sloppier. The heat in my house was unbearable by day 3, like living inside a slow cooker set to misery. My fridge smelled like a science experiment gone wrong, and my roses were drooping like they'd heard Karen's voice one too many times. But if she thought she could sweat me out, she was about to learn that a retired judge doesn't crack under pressure. He sharpens his claws. My little resistance squad, Tom, Maria, and me, was ready to turn Karen's game of petty fines into a full-blown chess match. And I was playing for checkmate. Our first move was reconnaissance. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a one-woman surveillance state, patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard and that chihuahua, Princess, who yapped like she was auditioning for a horror movie soundtrack. We needed dirt, and we needed it fast. Maria, with her librarian knack for unearthing secrets, suggested we start with Karen's own violations. Nobody's that perfect, she said, her eyes narrowing over her coffee mug. She's got skeletons, and I bet they're wearing tacky coral lipstick. Tom, ever the practical one, volunteered to tail her during her enforcement patrols. I tasked myself with digging deeper into the HOA's finances, because that murky audit was nagging at me like a splinter. Tom's first report came that evening, delivered over beers in my sweltering garage. He'd followed Karen on her evening rounds, keeping a safe distance in his beat-up pickup. "She's got a system," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "She hits every house on the block, takes photos, and scribbles notes like she's writing a novel. But get this, she spent 20 minutes measuring Mrs. Larson's hedges, then went straight to her own yard and ignored her overgrown weeds. Hypocrisy. Thy name is Karen." I filed that away, along with a mental note to check Mrs. Larson's hedges myself. If Karen was playing favorites, that was leverage. Meanwhile, Maria worked her magic. She'd sweet-talk the HOA's ancient secretary, Mrs. Gibbons, into sharing old meeting minutes. Turns out, Karen had pushed through a rule change doubling the fine limits without a proper vote. Shady, but not quite illegal. More interesting was the HOA's landscaping contract, which funneled $10,000 a month to a company called GreenVista Solutions. A quick Google search revealed GreenVista was registered to a Gary Thompson, Karen's spineless husband. Well, I muttered, sipping my warm beer. Looks like Karen's not just power-hungry. She's cashing in. I decided to poke the bear a little. The next morning, I strolled to Karen's house, carrying a tray of Maria's lemon bars as a peace offering. Her front yard was a study in contradictions, pristine petunias, but a rusty mailbox leaning like it had one too many. I knocked, and Karen answered, her smile as tight as her tracksuit. "Daniel," she said, eyeing the lemon bars like they might be laced with arsenic. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I leaned in, just enough to make her flinch. "Just being neighborly, Karen. By the way, I noticed GreenVista's doing the HOA's landscaping. Gary's company, right? Nice gig." Her face went white, then red, like a malfunctioning stoplight. "That's none of your business," she snapped, slamming the door. The lemon bar stayed on her porch, a sugary middle finger. That afternoon, the utility company finally restored my power, and the hum of my AC felt like a choir of angels. But Karen wasn't done. She escalated her campaign, slapping me with a new fine for unauthorized outdoor lighting, because my porch light was apparently too bright for community standards. I laughed until I realized the fine was $2,000. She was hitting me where it hurt, banking on me caving under the financial pressure. But judges don't cave, we counter. I called Susan, my lawyer friend, and gave her the green light to draft a cease and desist letter, citing harassment and property damage. I also filed a police report for the power line incident, attaching the security footage. The officer, a young guy named Rodriguez, raised an eyebrow when he saw Karen's ninja act. "This is bold," he said. "We'll look into it." Tom, meanwhile, had upped his spy game. He'd borrowed a drone from his nephew, a tech-obsessed teenager, and flown it over Karen's backyard. The footage was a jackpot, an unpermitted shed stuffed with landscaping equipment branded GreenVista Solutions, and, get this, a pile of cut power cables stashed behind it. "She's not just entitled," Tom said, grinning like a kid on Christmas. "She's a hoarder of felonies." I told him to keep the drone grounded for now. We didn't need Karen crying, "invasion of privacy," before we had our ducks in a row. Maria suggested we expand our coalition. We recruited Mrs. Larson, the hedge victim, who was livid after Karen fined her for non-compliant foliage density. Mrs. Larson was a retired schoolteacher with a voice like a foghorn and a grudge to match. "That woman's got no soul," she said, jabbing a finger at Karen's house. "I'll bring cookies to the next HOA meeting and rally the troops." I liked her style. Our little resistance was growing, and Karen was starting to slip. She'd been seen arguing with Gary in their driveway, her voice carrying like a banshee's wail. "You're ruining everything," she'd screamed, while Gary just shuffled back inside. Trouble in paradise? I could work with that. By the end of the week, the tension was thicker than the August humidity. Karen's fines were piling up, my inbox was flooded with her passive-aggressive emails, and the neighborhood was buzzing with whispers of rebellion. I sat on my porch, the evening air cool against my skin, and watched Karen's house. Her lights flickered, just for a second, and I couldn't help but smile. She thought she was untouchable, but every tyrant has a weak spot. I just had to find hers, and I was getting close. The neighborhood was starting to feel like a pressure cooker, and Karen was turning up the heat without realizing she was about to get scalded. My house was back online, the AC humming like a lullaby, but the war with Karen was far from over. Her latest fine, $2,000 for my blinding porch light, sat on my kitchen counter like a taunting gauntlet. I wasn't paying it, not a chance, but I needed to play this smart. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a wrecking ball in a coral tracksuit, and I was done letting her swing. It was time to tighten the screws. Our resistance squad, me, Tom, Maria, and now Mrs. Larson, met at my place that evening, the air thick with the scent of Maria's fresh-baked lemon bars and the faint whiff of rebellion. Tom spread out a map of the neighborhood on my dining table, marking Karen's patrol routes like we were planning a military campaign. "She's predictable," he said, tapping a red X on her house. "Every evening, 7 p.m., she's out there with that damn clipboard, terrorizing someone new." Maria, sipping her tea, added, "And she's sloppy." I checked the HOA bylaws again. She's supposed to file violation notices within 24 hours. Half of hers are late, which makes them invalid. I grinned. Sloppy's good. Sloppy's exploitable. Mrs. Larson, bless her, was ready to go nuclear. "I say we confront her at the next HOA meeting," she boomed, crumbling a lemon bar for emphasis. "Call her out in front of everyone." I held up a hand. "Not yet, Mrs. L. We need more ammo. If we go in half-cocked, she'll spin it, make us look like the bad guys." My years on the bench had taught me one thing. Timing is everything. We needed to hit Karen where it hurt, her ego, her wallet, and her precious authority. My next move was to lean on the police report. Officer Rodriguez called me back, sounding like he'd just bitten into a lemon. "We spoke to Ms. Thompson," he said, referring to Karen by her last name, which felt oddly formal for a woman who'd committed felony vandalism. "She denies everything, says she was home all night. No witnesses, no proof, except your footage, which we're reviewing." I could hear the skepticism in his voice. Karen's charm offensive was in full swing. I thanked him and hung up, knowing I'd need more than grainy video to nail her. That's when Tom dropped a bombshell. "I got a buddy at the utility company," he said, leaning back in his chair with a grin that could light up a courtroom. "He says the power line cut wasn't just vandalism. It damaged a junction box that serves half the block. The repair bill's north of $15,000, and the company's pissed. They're looking for someone to pin it on." My pulse quickened. If we could tie Karen to that bill, she'd be drowning in more than just her own ego. I told Tom to keep his buddy on speed dial and get me every detail of that repair report. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down. The next morning, I found a new violation notice taped to my mailbox. This one for excessive noise from my fountain, which gurgled so softly it could barely wake a butterfly. The fine? $3,000. I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh you let out when you're picturing someone's downfall. Karen was getting desperate, piling on fines like a kid stacking blocks, hoping the tower wouldn't topple. But I was ready to kick it over. I called Susan, my lawyer friend, and told her to file the cease and desist letter. "Make it scary," I said. "I want her to sweat." Susan chuckled. "Oh, she'll need a new tracksuit by the time I'm done." That afternoon, I decided to have a little fun. I repainted my mailbox an even brighter shade of blue, electric, retina-searing blue, and added a small sign. "Property of Daniel, HOA's favorite rebel." Karen's patrol car, a white SUV that screamed, "I'm watching you," slowed to a crawl as she passed. I waved from my porch, sipping iced tea with all the innocence of a choir boy. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought she'd crack a tooth. Later, Maria texted me. "She's ranting at the HOA board about your mailbox. Says it's a personal attack on her leadership. You're living rent-free in her head, Daniel." Good. I wanted her rattled. Our big break came that evening, courtesy of Maria's sleuthing. She dug deeper into GreenVista Solutions, Gary's landscaping company, and found a paper trail that could make a prosecutor blush. The HOA had paid GreenVista $120,000 for the all this time, but the neighborhood's lawns looked like they'd been mowed by a drunk goat. Maria cross-referenced invoices and found half were for consulting services with no details. "It's a slush fund," she said, her voice sharp with triumph. "Karen's funneling HOA money to her husband." I leaned back, the gears turning. Embezzlement was a bold accusation, but if we could prove it, Karen's reign was over. We decided to test the waters at the next HOA meeting, scheduled for Friday. Mrs. Larson baked a batch of her famous snickerdoodles, which we planned to use as bribes, goodwill gestures, to sway the crowd. Tom printed flyers summarizing Karen's invalid fines, careful to keep them anonymous. "No sense tipping her off," he said, folding them with the precision of a man who'd rebuilt engines for a living. I spent the evening polishing my speech, practicing in front of my bathroom mirror like I was back in the courtroom. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she was about to meet a judge who'd spent decades dismantling egos like hers. As the sun set, casting long shadows across my newly blue mailbox, I felt the tension coil tighter. Karen's SUV cruised by again, slower this time, her headlights lingering on my house like a predator's gaze. I raised my glass in a mock toast, knowing she was watching. She thought she was the queen of Oakwood Estates, but every kingdom falls eventually, and I was sharpening my guillotine. The HOA meeting was set for Friday evening in the community center, a beige box that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the moments before a courtroom verdict. I'd spent the week preparing, my dining table buried under HOA bylaws, financial records, and Susan's cease and desist letter, which was so sharp it could cut glass. Karen thought she was running this show, but I was about to steal the spotlight. My resistance squad, Tom, Maria, and Mrs. Larson, was locked and loaded, ready to turn her own meeting into her undoing. The plan was simple: expose her hypocrisy, plant seeds of doubt, and let her ego do the rest. A judge knows that the best traps are the ones the prey walks into willingly. I arrived early, carrying a tray of Mrs. Larson's snickerdoodles, which were practically a controlled substance in Oakwood Estates. Tom was already there, handing out our anonymous flyers to neighbors as they shuffled in. The flyers listed Karen's invalid fines, her late violation notices, and a subtle hint about GreenVista Solutions' questionable invoices. Nothing accusatory, just enough to make people squint. Maria was schmoozing with Mrs. Gibbons, the HOA secretary, who was clutching a thermos of tea and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Karen's been bullying her for months," Maria whispered as I set up the snack table. "If we play this right, she'll flip." Karen strutted in at 7 p.m. sharp, her clipboard gleaming under the fluorescent lights, princess tucked under her arm like a furry scepter. Her coral tracksuit had been upgraded to a blazer and skirt combo, but it still screamed, "I'm here to ruin your day." She scanned the room, her smile faltering when she saw me arranging cookies with the precision of a man who'd once organized evidence for a capital case. "Daniel," she said, her voice syrupy enough to gag a beehive, "I hope you're here to discuss your compliance issues." I flashed her a grin. "Oh, I'm here to discuss a lot of things, Karen. Grab a cookie." The meeting started with her usual spiel: community standards, aesthetic harmony, blah blah blah. She rattled off a list of fines, including my $3,000 fountain violation, which got a few gasps from the crowd. I stayed quiet, letting her dig her hole. Then came the open forum, our cue. Mrs. Larson stood first, her voice booming like a drill sergeant's. "I'd like to know why my hedges are non-compliant when your weeds, Karen, are taller than my grandson." The room tittered, and Karen's smile twitched like a bad Wi-Fi signal. "We're addressing all violations fairly," she said, but her grip on the clipboard tightened. Tom went next, holding up one of our flyers. "Can you explain why half these fines don't follow the bylaws? And what's with GreenVista Solutions getting paid for consulting when our lawns look like a post-apocalyptic prairie?" The room erupted in murmurs, and Karen's face went from red to a shade I can only describe as angry tomato. She stammered something about necessary expenses, but the crowd wasn't buying it. I raised my hand, slow and deliberate, like I was about to cross-examine a witness. Karen, I said, my voice calm but cutting. I'm curious about the HOA's audit. The one you've delayed for 6 months. Care to share where our dues are going? The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Karen's eyes darted to Gary, who was slouched in the back, looking like he'd rather be swallowed by the earth. The audit's in progress, she snapped. And this meeting isn't about me. I leaned back, letting her words hang like a bad odor. Maria jumped in, her librarian calm masking a razor's edge. Actually, Karen, it's about transparency. I've got copies of the bylaws here, and they say audits are due quarterly. You're 6 months late. What? She slid a stack of printed bylaws across the table, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for blood. Karen tried to pivot, ranting about my obscene blue mailbox, but the room was turning. Neighbors started shouting questions. Why were fines doubling? Why was GreenVista's contract never put to a vote? Mrs. Gibbons, bless her, finally cracked, her voice trembling as she stood. I've been trying to get the audit done, but Karen keeps blocking it. The room exploded, and Karen's clipboard hit the table with a thud. This is outrageous, she shrieked, but her voice was drowned out by the crowd's demands for answers. I stood, holding up Susan's cease and desist letter like a trophy. While we're on the topic of transparency, I said, I've got a legal issue to raise. Someone cut my power lines last week, causing $15,000 in damages. I've got video evidence, Karen, and the police are very interested. Her face froze, and for a moment, I thought she might bolt. Instead, she doubled down, slamming her hand on the table. You're making this up to defame me, she yelled. I just smiled. The footage doesn't lie, but you might want to talk to your lawyer. The meeting ended in chaos, with Karen storming out, Princess yapping in her wake. Neighbors mobbed me, asking for copies of the bylaws and offering their own Karen horror stories. One guy, Jim, said she'd find him for unauthorized mailbox font size. Another, Sarah, claimed Karen had threatened to tow her car for parking too close to the curb. The resistance was growing, and Karen's throne was wobbling. But I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. As I walked home, the streetlights casting shadows on my blue mailbox, I felt the tension ratchet up another notch. Karen was cornered, and cornered animals bite. That night, I got a call from Officer Rodriguez. We've reviewed your footage, he said. It's enough to bring her in for questioning, but we need more to press charges. Got anything else? I told him about the pile of power cables in her backyard, courtesy of Tom's drone. I'll get you a warrant, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Checkmate was close, but Karen had one more card to play, and it was a doozy. The fallout from the HOA meeting hung over Oakwood Estates like a storm cloud ready to burst. My blue mailbox stood defiant under the morning sun, but the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Karen had been humiliated in front of the neighborhood, her clipboard empire cracking under the weight of our questions. But I knew better than to underestimate her. A cornered Karen wasn't just dangerous, she was a Category 5 hurricane in a blazer, and I braced for impact. The first sign of trouble came at dawn, when I found my front yard trashed. My roses, those delicate heirlooms I'd spent years coaxing to perfection, were hacked to stubs, their petals scattered like confetti at a funeral. My fountain was clogged with dirt, the water murky as a swamp. And there, taped to my mailbox, was a new violation notice, property neglect, $5,000 fine. The audacity was almost admirable. Almost. I stood there, fists clenched, the scent of crushed rosebuds sharp in my nose, and knew this was Karen's retaliation. She wasn't just playing dirty, she was waging war. I called Tom and Maria for an emergency huddle. Mrs. Larson joined us, her arms crossed, her face a thunderstorm. That woman's got the nerve of a bull shark, she growled, eyeing the carnage in my yard. Tom checked my security cameras and hit pay dirt. There was Karen, at 2 a.m., wielding a pair of garden shears like a deranged Edward Scissorhands. She'd even brought Princess, who'd left a gift on my lawn for good measure. This is evidence, Tom said, saving the footage. She's done. I nodded, but my gut told me Karen wasn't out of tricks. She was too slippery, too obsessed with control. I sent the new footage to Officer Rodriguez, who was starting to sound like he'd rather deal with a bank robbery than Karen's antics. "This woman's a one-person crime wave," he said. "We're getting a warrant for her property based on the power line footage. Sit tight, Daniel." Sitting tight wasn't my style, so I called Susan, my lawyer friend, and told her to amend the cease and desist letter to include vandalism and harassment. "I want her to feel the walls closing in," I said. Susan laughed. "By the time I'm done, she'll be begging for mercy." But Karen wasn't begging. She was doubling down. That afternoon, she held an emergency HOA meeting in her driveway, a pathetic attempt to rally her loyalists. Only 3 people showed up. Gary, looking like he'd rather be at a root canal, Mrs. Gibbons, who kept glancing at her watch, and a guy named Carl, who'd once been fined for excessive porch chair tilt. Karen stood on a step stool, waving her clipboard like a battle flag, ranting about rebellious elements threatening the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as her speech fell flat. Carl yawned. Mrs. Gibbons left early. Gary just stared at his shoes. Karen's kingdom was crumbling, and she knew it. Then came her next move, and it was a gut punch. I got a letter from the county claiming my property was non-compliant with zoning regulations due to an unpermitted greenhouse. My greenhouse, a glass haven for my tomatoes, had been there for a decade, fully permitted. I smelled Karen's fingerprints all over this. A quick call to the county confirmed my suspicions. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint, complete with photos of my greenhouse and a forged document claiming it was built last year. Karen had connections, or at least, she thought she did. The county official, a board clerk named Linda, sounded skeptical but said they'd need to inspect. "This is going to cost you if it's unpermitted," she warned. I hung up, my blood boiling. Karen wasn't just fighting dirty. She was playing with fire. I rallied the resistance for a counterstrike. Maria dug into the county records and found my greenhouse permit, filed in 2012, clear as day. "She's forging documents now," Maria said, her voice low with disgust. "That's a felony." Tom, ever the gearhead, suggested we turn the tables. "Let's get her on record admitting something. Set a trap." I liked the sound of that. We brainstormed over Mrs. Larson's snickerdoodles, and I came up with a plan straight out of my courtroom playbook. Bait Karen into a confrontation, record it, and let her hang herself with her own words. That evening, I invited Karen over under the pretense of resolving our issues. I set up a hidden microphone in my living room, courtesy of Tom's nephew, who was thrilled to play spy. Karen arrived, clipboard in hand, her smile so forced it could have cracked porcelain. "I hope you're ready to comply, Daniel," she said, eyeing my trashed roses with a smirk. I leaned back, casual as a cat. "Actually, Karen, I'm curious about that county complaint. Funny how it mentions a greenhouse that's been permitted for a decade. Know anything about that?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but she recovered fast. "I'm just protecting the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Some people don't follow the rules." I pushed harder. "Like GreenVista Solutions? I hear they're charging $10,000 a month for consulting. Must be nice for Gary." Her face went rigid, and she leaned forward, her voice a hiss. "You think you're clever, Daniel, but you're out of your league. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure you lose this house." Bingo. The microphone caught every word. I smiled, cool as ice. "Thanks for the chat, Karen. See yourself out." As she stormed off, I sent the recording to Susan, who hooped so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is gold," she said. "Threatening property seizure? That's extortion. Combined with the vandalism and power line evidence, she's toast." I felt the tension coil tighter, like a spring about to snap. Karen was spiraling, and I was ready to pull the trigger. But first, I needed one more piece of the puzzle, and it was sitting in her backyard, behind that unpermitted shed. The air in Oakwood Estates was thick with the scent of cut grass and impending doom. Karen's latest stunt, trashing my roses and sicking the county on my greenhouse, had pushed me past patience and straight into predator mode. My years on the bench had taught me one thing. When someone's desperate, they get sloppy, and Karen was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. The recording of her extortion attempt was burning a hole in my pocket, but I needed more to seal her fate. That pile of power cables in her backyard was calling my name, and I was ready to answer. Our resistance squad gathered at Maria's house, the air sweetened by her lemon bars and sharpened by our collective rage. Tom was practically vibrating with excitement, waving a USB drive with the latest drone footage of Karen's shed. "It's not just cables," he said, his grin feral. "There's a whole stash of tools back there, bolt cutters, shears, even a hacksaw. She's got enough to open a vandalism superstore." Maria, flipping through HOA records, added, "And that shed's unpermitted. I checked the county database. No record of it. She's been preaching rules while breaking them." Mrs. Larson slammed her fist on the table, rattling the lemon bars. "Let's burn her at the stake." I chuckled. Tempting, but let's stick to legal arson. The plan was simple but surgical. Step 1. Get the police to raid Karen's backyard. Officer Rodriguez had the warrant for the power line vandalism, and I sent him Tom's drone footage to sweeten the deal. Step 2. Expose Karen's financial shenanigans at the next HOA meeting, using Maria's evidence of GreenVista's inflated invoices. Step 3. Let Susan unleash a lawsuit that would hit Karen where it hurt, her wallet and her pride. But first, I needed to keep Karen off balance, make her think she was still in control. A distracted enemy is a weak one, and I was playing chess while she was playing checkers. I started with a little psychological warfare. I printed 100 flyers with a photo of my mutilated roses and the caption, "Ask Karen about neighborhood beautification." Tom and his nephew spent the morning slipping them into mailboxes across the block, careful to avoid Karen's patrols. By noon, her SUV was speeding through the neighborhood, her face a mask of fury as she snatched flyers off lawns. I watched from my porch, sipping iced tea, my blue mailbox glowing like a beacon of defiance. She screeched to a stop in front of my house, leaping out with Princess yapping in her arms. "You're pathetic, Daniel," she shouted, waving a crumpled flyer. "You think this will stop me?" I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. "Careful, Karen. Cameras are always watching." She froze, then stormed off, her blazer flapping like a wounded bird. That afternoon, the county inspector, Linda, showed up to check my greenhouse. She was a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard that rivaled Karen's, but her eyes softened when she saw my tomatoes. "These are heirlooms, aren't they?" she asked, inspecting a ripe brandy wine. I handed her my permit, crisp and dated 2012. She snorted. "Whoever filed this complaint wasted my time. You're clean." I casually mentioned Karen's name, and Linda's face darkened. "She's been flooding our office with nonsense complaints. We're starting to flag her." I filed that away, another arrow in my quiver. The real fireworks came that evening. Officer Rodriguez called, his voice tight with anticipation. "We executed the warrant. Found the cables in her shed, along with the shears from your footage. She's claiming they're Gary's, but he's not talking. We're bringing her in for questioning." I could have danced a jig, but I kept my cool. "What about the utility company's repair bill?" I asked. Rodriguez chuckled. "They're sending it to her. 15 grand, plus potential charges for tampering with public utilities." She's in deep. I thanked him and hung up, the taste of victory sharp on my tongue. But Karen wasn't done fighting. The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox gone, yanked clean out of the ground, a gaping hole left in its place. A note was taped to my door. "Consider this a warning." The handwriting was unmistakably hers, all sharp angles and passive-aggressive loops. I laughed, long and loud, because this was her death knell. I called Rodriguez, who added theft to her growing rap sheet, and sent Susan the note for the lawsuit. "She's handing us the rope," Susan said, practically giddy. "Keep pushing her, Daniel. She'll crack." I decided to do just that. I replaced my mailbox with an even brighter one, neon blue, with a solar-powered light that could guide ships in a storm. I added a sign, "In memory of Karen's sanity." Neighbors stopped by to laugh, snapping photos like it was a tourist attraction. Karen's SUV circled my house 3 times that day, her face a storm cloud, but she didn't dare stop. The neighborhood was turning, and she could feel it. Mrs. Larson reported that Carl, the porch share guy, had joined our side, along with Sarah, the curb parking victim. Our resistance was a small army now, and Karen's allies were abandoning ship. As the sun set, casting a blue glow across my new mailbox, I sat on my porch, the air cool against my skin. The HOA meeting was 2 days away, and I was ready to drop the hammer. Karen thought she could intimidate me, but she'd forgotten one thing. A judge doesn't flinch. I raised my glass to the empty street, knowing the final act was coming, and it was going to be a showstopper. The day of the HOA meeting felt like the calm before a courtroom showdown, the air heavy with the promise of justice. My neon blue mailbox glowed like a lighthouse, a beacon for every neighbor Karen had wronged. The resistance, Tom, Maria, Mrs. Larson, Carl, Sarah, and a dozen others, had spent the last 48 hours preparing for the kill shot. Maria had compiled a dossier on GreenVista Solutions, complete with invoices, bank records, and a timeline of Karen's audit delays. Tom had printed new flyers, this time naming Karen directly and calling for a vote to oust her as HOA president. Mrs. Larson had baked enough snickerdoodles to bribe a small nation. And me? I was ready to play my trump card. 30 years of judicial experience, sharpened to a razor's edge. The community center was packed, standing room only, with neighbors whispering and passing our flyers like contraband. Karen arrived late, her blazer wrinkled, her clipboard clutched like a life raft. Princess was nowhere in sight, probably banished to the SUV for morale reasons. Gary slunk in behind her, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in a week. The police questioning had rattled them both, and the utility company's $15,000 bill was sitting on their doorstep like a ticking bomb. Karen tried to start the meeting with her usual spiel, but the crowd was restless, their murmurs rising like a tide. I caught her eye and gave her a smile, the kind that says, "Checkmate's coming." Mrs. Larson kicked things off, standing with the authority of a woman who disciplined generations of rowdy kids. I moved to discuss the removal of Karen Thompson as HOA president, she boomed, holding up a flyer. Her fines are illegal, her contracts are shady, and she's been vandalizing property. The room erupted, cheers mixing with shouts of agreement. Karen's face went white, then red, her clipboard trembling. "This is slander," she shrieked, but Maria was ready. She stood, calm as a librarian in a storm, and slid her dossier across the table. "These are public records," she said. "GreenVista Solutions, owned by Gary Thompson, has been paid $120,000 for subpar work. No bids, no votes. That's embezzlement." The crowd roared, and Karen's composure cracked like cheap glass. "You have no proof," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by neighbors waving flyers and demanding answers. Tom took the floor, holding up his phone with the drone footage of Karen's shed. "Care to explain the power cables, Karen? Or the shears that matched Daniel's vandalism?" The room went silent, every eye on her. She stammered, her eyes darting to Gary, who looked like he was praying for an alien abduction. That's not mine," she finally spat, but the crowd wasn't buying it. I stood, slow and deliberate, like I was approaching the bench for a sentencing. "Karen," I said, my voice carrying the weight of a gavel, "I've got security footage of you cutting my power lines, vandalizing my roses, and stealing my mailbox. The police have it. The utility company has it. And this room has had enough of you." I held up Susan's lawsuit papers, thick as a novel. "This is a civil suit for damages, harassment, and extortion. And I hear the county's looking into your forged greenhouse complaint. You might want to call a lawyer." The room exploded in cheers, and Karen's clipboard hit the floor with a pathetic clatter. She tried one last stand, screaming about community standards and ungrateful neighbors, but it was over. Mrs. Gibbons, the HOA secretary, stood and delivered the killing blow. "I second the motion to remove Karen as president," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm resigning from the board until we get a full audit." The vote was unanimous. Karen was out, effective immediately. She stormed out, Gary trailing like a whipped dog, as the room chanted, "Blue mailbox. Blue mailbox." The aftermath was sweeter than Mrs. Larson's snickerdoodles. The police charged Karen with vandalism, theft, and tampering with public utilities. The utility company slapped her with the $15,000 repair bill, and Susan's lawsuit added another $50,000 in damages for my yard and emotional distress. The HOA audit, finally conducted, revealed GreenVista had siphoned off $200,000 over all time, and the county launched a fraud investigation. Karen and Gary put their house up for sale a week later, but no one was buying, probably because Princess's yapping was listed as a neighborhood feature. I rebuilt my garden, my roses rising like a phoenix from the ashes. My neon blue mailbox became a local legend, with neighbors stopping by to take selfies. The new HOA president, Maria, rewrote the bylaws to prioritize transparency and ban fines for excessive vibrancy. At the next meeting, Mrs. Larson proposed a community garden, funded by the recovered GreenVista money, and named it Daniel's Revenge. I laughed until I cried. As I sat on my porch, the fountain gurgling softly, I raised a glass to my mailbox, glowing under the stars. Karen thought she could break me, but she forgot one thing. A judge doesn't just uphold the law, he wields it. And in Oakwood Estates, justice was served also with a side of snickerdoodles. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.